eyes wide open. Vernan Heights was the kind of town where people stayed. Generations passed through, but roots grew deep. It was quiet, nestled between rolling hills and the endless winding interstate that cut through the town's heart like a lifeline. For Robert Mays, Vernan Heights was home. He was 32 years old, with a simple life and all he could ask for: a loving wife named Sarah and their 6-year-old daughter, Lily. Robert worked in logistics for a local trucking company, managing routes, drivers, and keeping deliveries on time. The irony of his profession was that he hated long drives, often telling Sarah he could never be one of those guys behind the wheel of an 18-wheeler. "No way," he'd say, shaking his head with a grin. "I'll keep my feet on the ground, thanks." Robert was tall, broad-shouldered, with kind eyes that Lily swore were the color of hot cocoa. He loved Saturday breakfasts at their favorite diner, evening walks with Sarah, and tucking Lily into bed with silly stories about magical creatures. Life was good. That was until something horrible happened. The morning of the stroke was no different from any other. The family ate breakfast together, Lily giggling as Robert put whipped cream on his nose. He kissed Sarah goodbye, promised to grab groceries on his way home, and went off to work. By lunch, his co-workers noticed something was off. Robert stumbled as he stood up from his desk, his face pale and slack. He tried to speak, to say, "I'm fine," but his words slurred together into a garbled mess. His vision swam, and before he knew it, the world tilted sideways. Robert collapsed, his body jerking violently as someone screamed for an ambulance. Robert was having a stroke. Robert awoke in the hospital, though awake wasn't the right word. He could hear the rhythmic beep, beep, beep of machines around him, voices drifting in and out like waves. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. His brain screamed, but his body betrayed him. "What's happening?" "Mr. Mays suffered a severe stroke," a doctor explained softly to Sarah. Robert couldn't see her, but he felt her there. "We're stabilizing him, but the damage is extensive. I'm afraid recovery will be difficult, if possible at all." Sarah cried. He heard her sobs. And in his silent prison of flesh and bone, Robert screamed too. Days passed, maybe weeks. Robert couldn't tell anymore. Time stretched endlessly as he lay in his hospital bed. Nurses would come and go. Sometimes Lily visited, her tiny hand brushing his as she whispered, "Get better, Daddy. Please." He wanted to respond, to hold her, to hold Sarah, to do anything but lie there like a shell. "Why me?" He repeated the thought over and over in his mind, like a broken record. Why is this happening? Some days, he'd wonder if he was dead already. Maybe this was hell, eternal stillness with nothing but his thoughts and the distant murmurs of a world he could no longer touch. How could this get any worse? And then, Robert felt it before it happened. The weight of his eyelids, the sensation of light creeping through. He strained against the heaviness, fighting to see the world beyond the dark. Finally, his eyes shot open. Blinding white light exploded into his vision, but it wasn't the fluorescent glow of a hospital room. It was headlights. His heart raced as confusion flooded his senses. He was sitting in the cab of a truck, hands gripping a massive steering wheel, the hum of the engine vibrating beneath him. The dashboard glowed faintly. The speedometer needle hovered at 70 miles per hour. Outside the windshield, the highway stretched on in a seemingly endless, dark ribbon. What is this? Where am I? Robert blinked hard, his breath catching as he looked around. A coffee cup rattled in a holder, papers were scattered on the passenger seat, and a CB radio crackled faintly with static. Suddenly it hit him. This isn't the hospital. He glanced down at his hands, calloused and rough, nothing like the hands he knew. He caught his reflection in the rearview mirror, an older, haggard man with deep-set eyes and a baseball cap pulled low. And then the memories came rushing back, like floodgates bursting open. The stroke, the hospital, Sarah and Lily. It was a dream. None of it was real. The truth hit Robert like a slap. He wasn't a logistics manager in Vernan Heights. He wasn't a loving husband or a doting father. He was a truck driver, a lonely man hauling freight through the night, running on fumes and bad coffee. The life he'd just experienced had been nothing but a cruel fantasy conjured by his subconscious while he slept. But now he was awake, fully, terrifyingly awake, and the headlights were still there. The oncoming truck was massive, its high beams blinding. Robert's heart pounded as the horn blared, a deafening, soul-shaking sound. He yanked at the wheel, but his limbs were heavy, sluggish, like they weren't fully his. Panic surged through him as the realization set in. He'd fallen asleep at the wheel. The dream, his perfect life, had been the product of exhaustion, a brief reprieve from his grueling, lonely reality. But now he was back, with only seconds to react. The other truck's horn blared again, closer this time. The two vehicles were on a collision course, barreling toward each other at deadly speeds. No, 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 wake up! This isn't how it ends! But it was too late. The headlights filled his vision, burning away the dream, the memories, the fleeting taste of happiness he'd never known. And then, impact. The collision tore through the highway like a thunderclap, sending fire and twisted metal skyward. The explosion lit up the night, a blinding flash that could be seen for miles. Both trucks were obliterated in an instant. Robert May's dream life died with him on that desolate stretch of road. The man who had fallen asleep at the wheel, the man who had dreamed of love, family, and a better world, vanished in a blaze of steel and flame. And somewhere in the ether between wakefulness and oblivion, his last thought lingered. Was it better in the dream? But the highway offered no answers, only silence.